All right. Well, welcome everyone to Lunch Without Lunch. Hello to everyone online. Hello to everyone that joined us in person. I am Amber Rowden, the community storyteller with Rainforest Alberta here in Calgary. We have Brigitte Legault, the community manager at Rainforest Alberta here in Calgary. And we're very excited to be presenting a Lunch Without Lunch today hybrid. And so we're going to start off with a little bit of an introduction. And so we have this slide with our social contract, and there are 10 values that we live, work, and play by. So if you haven't already, please use that QR code, scan the social contract, and yeah. Before we get into the scorecard results, I want to take time to start with a land acknowledgement. So in the spirit of reconciliation, we acknowledge that we live, work, and play on the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy, the Siksika, the Kainai, and the Piikani, the Tsuut'ina, the Stoney Nakoda Nations, the Métis Nation, Region 3, and all people who make their homes in the Treaty 7 region of Southern Alberta. If you are coming from somewhere else in the province, in the country, or in the world online, please feel free to share your own land acknowledgement in the chat. And as always, if you would like to share your land acknowledgement at the beginning of Lunch Without Lunch, we ask that you reach out to me or Brigitte, and we can definitely have you share that. So thank you for providing an opportunity to engage and demonstrate leadership on reconciliation and for your commitment in joining us to do so. So do you have a question that you're curious to know about? Have you ever wondered what someone, in your shoes might have asked? Are you looking for a mentor? Are you curious about anything and everything? Well, we're digitizing Rainforest's community, and so we want you to be a part of that. Join Alberta's innovation ecosystem powered by Inkly. Ask questions, be matched to someone that can purposefully answer those questions and have those answers right away. If you scan this QR code, you'll be taken there right away to join. If you have any trouble getting on that, please reach out to me or Brigitte. And starting March 13th, we are launching Rainforest Circles, which is a 7-week experience aimed at cultivating effective leadership traits. We have 2 incredible leadership activists and renegades, Megan Donahoe and Alicia White, who will be leading these. And it's a chance to learn new skills and leadership perspectives that are in line with the Rainforest Alberta social contract and to deepen trust and relationships across the ecosystem. I'll give you a second to scan that barcode where you can get more information and you can join the Rainforest Circles. And this is a free experience that's happening. And so we're very excited for that. I don't know what happened to there's the barcode again. You can also, it's on our website, and I will throw the link in the chat, and it's on our social media as well. Okay, so we're going to dive right into the main topic of the hour, the 2022 YYC Scorecard results. First off, thank you to everyone who participated in taking the survey and sharing out the survey. We really appreciate that. Me and Brigitte are done tagging you all on LinkedIn, but it was definitely something that we had to do to get the participants and the what we needed for the report, and it definitely shows for this year's results. So a quick history into what the 6 pillars are, and these 6 pillars make up the ecosystem, and like any natural ecosystem, having the right balance is crucial. And so the scorecard is measured on a scale of 1,000, and each pillar is weighted differently. So the scorecard is a snapshot of the ecosystem in time. It describes its strengths and weaknesses, and it works to identify opportunities to improve the culture of innovation in Calgary. The scorecard asks a series of questions within each pillar, which have been thoughtfully adapted. And so in 2022, we worked with DEI experts and data analysis to thoughtfully rewrite and adapt the questions with a DE&I focused lens, which we continued into 2022. And the scorecard ran for 3 weeks in January. And I'm going to pass it over to Brigitte.
Sure. Hi, everybody. We have about, I don't know, 30 pushing 40 people online as well, just so everyone here in person is aware of what's happening virtually. Thank you, platform, for your IT support today as well. So we have a little bit of a look back on 2021, which was the previous RAND survey, just so we can kind of get grounded in where we came from with this scorecard assessment. So these were some of the key takeaways from last year. There was, I'm going to go over here so I can read. Our score last year was 661 out of 1,000, and you'll see the breakdown of that by pillar in just a moment. We had significant gaps identified within the culture pillar, which created opportunities for lots of room for improvement. And you'll see that we saw incremental improvement this past year. There was also, of course, this theme of ample room to increase funding and investment opportunities, particularly early stage funding opportunities. And there was a strong appetite for both mentorship and a desire for a central repository of resources. There was also this topic about growing and attracting talent. So we'll see how the talent theme shifted in 2022 shortly. And this critical importance of DE&I, which we've been championing through our work at Rainforest Alberta in promoting the pillar of culture, the heaviest weighted pillar. And also just a vibe from the community that they want to see more action taken. And so throughout this past year, you may have heard Amber and I reinforcing the fact that the movement on these pillar scores are up to everybody in the ecosystem, not just those involved with the rainforest movement on a week-to-week basis. So just a friendly reminder there. Some areas of work that Rainforest, though, have particularly taken on over this past year, and you'll see these highlighted in the fulsome report that will be released this afternoon, are around the areas of culture. So we really saw this as an opportunity to step up when it comes to promoting a culture of trust and inclusivity. And so we engaged Inclusivity to do some inclusive user testing on our social contract, and that work will continue into 2023. We haven't been able to quite implement the recommendations, but it's coming. And we also kind of leaped over to the corresponding pillar of leadership because the two are so intertwined. And you may have seen us at Innovation Week talking about how to rethink leadership. And this does go a little bit against the way the pillars defined in traditional rainforest verbiage around leadership. We're challenging the status quo, and how can we rethink leadership to come from candor, generosity, paying it forward, curiosity. And so that's the work we're doing with the Rainforest Circles, which Amber mentioned, and which will continue into next year. In response to this ongoing need for a common place for all the resources in the ecosystem and for more accessible mentorship, we launched the Inkly app with support from the CIC and Alberta Innovates, and we've grown to 300 plus users now and are looking to move that across the province. So if you're unfamiliar, this platform democratizes the access to resources, to mentorship. So we're seeing students access venture capitalists on this platform. Like there's a very interesting collision effect that's not only happening on the platform, but also offline through the relationships built there. So we had some recommendations last year from our DE&I expert, Rachel Wade, who couldn't be with us today, unfortunately. Neither could the rest of our team, which we'll acknowledge at the end of the presentation, but there were significant expertise involved in the production of this report over this past very busy week. But the recommendations from last year do hold true into this year around connecting experience with the newbies. And we'll talk about why the demographics are telling us this. Minding the gap between certain gaps in the ecosystem amongst individuals and resources, and really nurturing psychological safety more intentionally. So on that note, we'll move ahead, not following my notes at all. We'll be talking about next. The key takeaways from this year, if the remote control would work. You slide. I would just go into them, but I'm totally off topic on my notes. Our score has increased. Oh, this is you. Take it away, Amber. Oh, we just wanted to like pat ourselves on the back with that last quote around Rainforest doing considerable work around the culture leadership. We are patting ourselves on the back because it actually came up repeatedly in the verbatim in the survey, and we're grateful. It's not obviously Amber and I, it's a pretty large group of individuals and organizations who have showed up behind the scenes for Rainforest in this past year. I'll name a few: Inception U and all the leadership team there, Megan and Alicia, Ty McKinney, Dr. Ty McKinney, I'll forget others, Rachel Wade, many more who have really been in the background helping us push this work forward from their areas of expertise. So it's not just what the flavor of the day for Amber and I. This was the work we've moved forward on was all based in the data from last year and now with experts moving forward. But I really love this comment about it being everybody's job to move these scores forward. So we'll move ahead and Amber will show us the results for this year. Drum roll, please.
689 out of 1,000. So we have increased 28 points since 2021. We had an increased sample size of 205 respondents, and of those, 85% of participants who had not participated in the scorecard last year. Although there is some discrepancy in this because we could have had people that used a different email, which is why we highly encourage people to use their individual email when signing the social contract and when filling out the scorecard. We also had 241 surveys that were filled out, which is 69% more than last year, which is absolutely incredible. And all of I'm going to go to the next slide. So this is our year-over-year comparison. And so 2020 results demonstrate incremental increase across all pillars since 2021. And some key elements to note is that resources, engaged activities, and policy and infrastructure are the highest they have been in any single year. And culture is the second highest it's been since any year of the scorecard.
Okay, so key takeaways from this year, they weren't too far off from the key takeaways from last year. But of course, there was this complete increase in participation, which was really encouraging to see. One of the themes that really came across loud and clear this year was about embracing failure to build a pathway to success. So a lot of folks through the verbatim spoke about our lack of ability to really do this well in Calgary, and for folks being able to share failure openly as part of their path to building their startups. It's not something they all necessarily feel comfortable doing. So it all leads again back to the theme of psychological safety and just the culture of acceptance around failure. Then we had this theme of building a strong and lasting foundation. So what does this mean exactly? Well, it really stemmed from the policy and infrastructure pillar, primarily around policy. We've heard this every year for the past few years, but it was especially loud this year around the approach to technology by government. It's perceived to be outdated and has resulted in challenges for companies in areas such as R&D, commercialization, and software development. So there were many who also mentioned the lack of available capital overall, and the lack of awareness to the broader public about all of the resources that are available if the path of a startup or a founder entrepreneur is something they're interested in. There was significant commentary around the government's, shall I say, inability to see the long-term vision for this sector in the city, and so planning sustainably and accordingly to make that happen. The power of representation in a community was loud and clear. So while there are plenty of strong leaders and role models within the ecosystem, and there was a lot of positivity around the growth within diversity in the community, so that was really positive to see, there's still ample room to grow in this area. Many folks spoke about not being able to see themselves in the role models that exist in the community, but there was also a lot of positive commentary around this topic as well. So that was great to see. We spoke a bit already about resources and funding shortages and bridging that gap. So I won't beat a dead horse, and we'll talk about it again in the resources pillar. And then finally, engaging and empowering the ecosystem. So there was a real theme around positivity around the different engaged activities that are being hosted throughout the city. But there was still, as people like to criticize, there's still room for improvement. There's room for inclusivity. There's room for top down to work with grassroots and really broaden that depth of inclusion within the activities that we take on and the action-oriented activity that happens within the activities and other various happenings in the ecosystem. So people looking for more hands-on interactive sessions, workshops, things that will really move their path forward versus just kind of hearing from the same voices that they've already heard from. So those are the key takeaways.
So the score for culture was 220 out of 300. It was increased by 8 points, and it's the second highest it's been throughout all the years. And so some of the contributing themes, as Brigitte kind of touched on, were failure and risk, inclusion and trust, and community. So with failure and risk, there's still a noticeable absence of self-confidence required to launch startups, which is attributed to the fear of taking risks. And some members of the community feel that bold and unconventional ideas are often met with skepticism and disbelief. And this highlights the need for a shift in our mindset towards failure and risk, which is something we'll need to focus on going forward. Identifying culture drivers. And so there were significant comments about the close-knit, supportive, and friendly atmosphere found within the ecosystem and how entrepreneurs drive cultural change as they really embody culture more than accelerators and investment groups. And then inclusion and trust. There was an increase in the 2022 culture score because individuals are rating the ecosystem's welcoming and inclusivity behavior 2.65 points higher this year. And obviously there's noted improvements surrounding diversity, equity, inclusion, but there's room for improvements, as with the mention of women entrepreneurs not feeling safe nor being treated fairly in the ecosystem, which has been brought to light the past last year and coming into this year, which is something that we are looking to address going forward.
Okay. We'll move ahead to the second highest rated pillar of leadership, which again, I believe took an incremental increase. We'll get to the slide momentarily. The three key themes that came across in the leadership pillar through the surveys were around transparency. Oh, there was a nice quote we missed there. Should we go back to it for fun? I'll let you take this in.
So this quote was, "I feel that truly big and unexpected ideas often are met with confusion and shock by members of the community," which just reiterates how people are scared to take risks because they are met with that disbelief, and that we need to really change that mindset going forward, that big ideas actually do lead to innovation. They lead to dreamers and innovators launching big ideas. So we need to embrace failure and risk.
It's the weeds in the rainforest. I don't know if any of you attended the fireside chat we did with Greg Horowitz, one of the co-authors of the book, The Rainforest, Building the Next Silicon Valley. He spoke about the currency of trust that existed in Silicon Valley, in that if someone had a big, crazy idea, it was met with, how can I help? How can we, how can we realize this versus, well, that's a terrible idea because so-and-so is doing it, or what have you. So just bringing that more to light, and maybe we'll do some work on that this year through Rainforest, and maybe your organizations can do some work through that on that as well. So leadership pillar, we had this nice little small increase up. Hi, V, welcome. There was these themes around transparency and awareness. So folks kind of wondering, especially as this ecosystem is growing substantially, who are the leaders? Because if you haven't been around the block for very long, it's not entirely clear to you who the leaders are. At the Rainforest, we're really challenging the whole mindset around leadership, as I mentioned, around we're all leaders and there's ways we can all show up as leaders. And so again, this is a topic we'll really be bringing to light in the coming months, especially. There was also this theme of meaningful action. So while people did see that there was increased diversity of thought being displayed by leadership, it was not always backed up by substantial and effective actions. So the community did kind of see this discrepancy between their leaders' intentions and their actions, and that there was sometimes the feeling that reciprocity, thank you, Court, is expected once a leader has given back to a community member. So something to keep in mind. It was certainly a theme within the commentary. And then finally, this topic of diversity, which continues to come up. Again, there was a significantly more positive commentary around this topic of diversity, and people are starting to see movement in this area, but that there is still work to do. Particular groups looking for increased representation were Indigenous and I believe Southeast Asian, but we'll get to that momentarily. Lastly, there is still this kind of overarching theme of C-suites within tech companies being dominated by white males, as well as other leadership roles. Additionally, white males getting disproportionate funding compared to the other demographics that we captured. So that's leadership.
Do you want to take this quote?
Okay. This is just a quote that really reinforced the fact that as the ecosystem grows, newcomers aren't necessarily aware, who to turn to as far as leadership is concerned. But again, this pillar we do find can create a bit of discrepancy because people could view it as leadership within their own company, their own organization, or they could view it as leaders within the ecosystem who just really take initiative and step up. So take it for what you will, but we thought this was an impactful comment.
Policy and infrastructure, we saw an increase of 5 points with the contributing themes of government pace. And, dare we say, the government's approach to technology has not kept pace with the changing times. There have been lots of comments, and we have seen this quite a bit, that the government needs to provide better support to the technology community. There's been a slow turnaround with the startups paced, a lack of funding, and with faster decision making. Economic diversification skepticism. Some skeptics question the Alberta government's commitment to diversifying the economy. The concerns about the government support for startups. And one of the many comments that we've seen is the lack of awareness among people outside of the technology industry regarding the support systems in place. And then mapping the system. This is something we've also heard quite a bit, where there's a lot of resources, a lot of programs, a lot of resources, programs, activities happening, but where they all land and where to go, there's no navigation spot for them. And people, that are new to the ecosystem or people that are already kind of in there, they don't know where to go, where to start, or where they should land.
Which also led or linked to feelings of exclusion, actually. So that was probably important to note as well. There was also, to add to what Amber spoke about, there was some commentary about accelerators in particular and the overabundance of accelerator programming and the desire for increased transparency around the outcomes from these accelerator programs and increased deal flow created because of these programs. So we'll talk to our friends at those programs.
Thank you.
All right, we'll go to the next slide. When I say we'll talk to our friends at those programs, this report is published for everybody's revision. We have some organizations in particular, including Calgary Economic Development. We're hoping to get it in front of city councillors and other folks who may not be as aware of what's going on within these 6 pillars of our tech ecosystem, or even what they are. And there are other assessments that measure the pillars differently. I'll quickly measure that as well. And we're fully aware of that. And those were taken into consideration when we revised the scorecard assessment last year. And you can read more about that in the appendix of the 2021 report. Sound like an advertisement. Okay, so resources pillar. Again, a nice, solid, steady increase in this pillar. Encouraging that there were certain demographics who really rated this pillar higher and are obviously seeing that there are resources there that match their needs. Again, we have this topic of funding challenges, so I don't think we need to go too much further into that unless there was a particular note. No, other than like we talk about early stage capital, private capital, and barriers within the grant process. So grant process applications taking too long for the pace of startups. and that they're also having to focus their efforts around those applications instead of building their companies. So that came across loud and clear. On the topic of talent this year, it was interesting how quickly we shifted from wanting to attract new talent to the theme this year being around the imbalance of prioritizing the production of entry-level talent and being able to scale up individuals' skills to like grow within their own professions. So upskilling at this point. So that was something that came up quite a few times. And also the lack of skills. So the overall skill shortages in continuing in sales, marketing, and customer success. There were many recommendations around how to meet this gap, and they were around collaborations with post-secondaries, offering different professional development opportunities, and offering more accessible mentorship to grow skills, so that we can conduct effective knowledge transfer as the different generations move through the system. And then, of course, this topic again of navigating overly abundant resources. And as I mentioned, folks feeling excluded if they couldn't necessarily find their way or just not accessing resources at all because of that challenge and the time it takes to do it. What's happening there? Large, well-known organizations continue to receive funding where smaller innovators tend to be overlooked. So there was this theme of the same organizations continuously what's your comments, Jade? Accessing, being provided access to funding, whereas some of the smaller innovators being continuously told they're not ready or they need to do X before they'll be considered, etc. Yeah.
For role models, we saw a 2-point increase, and it was kind of awesome to see other, non-binary and gender non-conforming individuals rated role models highest, and founders that were in the ecosystem for more than 5 years rated. That's in the wrong spot, so I will have to change that. Don't focus on that. Never mind. The contributing themes for a role model were the desire for increased representation. There is notes that the ecosystem is trying to diversify and increase representation. However, there is always room for improvement, and there is a shortage of diverse and accessible role models in senior positions, with this reoccurring of a dominance of white male figures and limited representation of women and non-binary, non-gender conforming individuals, people of different ethnicities, sexual orientations, backgrounds in those roles and positions. The support for role models, there's a need for more approach to acknowledge and support role models in the ecosystem, particularly those from diverse backgrounds who may face additional barriers to accessing those opportunities, and the measurement and transparency. So there's an absence of information on who the current role models are, and this raises questions and emphasizes the need for more inclusive representation. It was felt that despite facing challenges such as mental health and visibilities, these individuals play a critical role in inspiring and guiding the next generation of entrepreneurs and leaders. And there were many comments that many founders who are viewed as role models are too busy to be highly visible. So it's just continuing to increase that representation within role models. And so these were some of the role models identified in YYC. Just take a look and check out who they are.
Many of you are here in person.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you for being a role model and inspiring us in Calgary and across the ecosystem. And we're grateful for you, and let's continue to inspire and support the next generation of role models in YYC and beyond.
Cool. Oh, we still have another pillar. Okay, engaged activities. So again, a lot of positivity around the breadth of activities that are going on around the city. Interesting that investors were one of the groups who rated this pillar higher. And is it African Canadians, I believe, who rated engaged activities, also as higher. We're highlighting both of those higher rating groups. We did see a lot of commentary around the need for action within these engaged activities. So while there's a lot of great activities happen, what are coming out of these activities and these events that can be action to both increase the score of the scorecard, but also founders' journeys through the ecosystem. There was a theme around collaboration and this desire for top-down organizations and grassroots organizations to come together to really blend that breadth of activity and the value, perceived value of those activities. And then lastly, around content, there was some comments around most of the engaged activity content being geared towards early stage startups and scale-ups wanting a little more attention and learning opportunities. And to that point, learning opportunities, things like shared experiences by role models, hands-on workshops, interactive sessions, and improved accessibility of events through a calendar. There's a calendar at Platform Calgary now that you can put your events in. There's also a Debbie Butts calendar. So the information is definitely out there. Perhaps it's just about kind of connecting the dots between the info and the individuals. And oh yeah, again, more later stage content. So more engaged on the activities. And that's why we have a pillar of engaged activities. Okay. Before we go into this section of the report, we will just say we are not experts on this topic. We have been advised by experts on this topic, and our dear friend Rachel Wade is very accessible to our community, except for today, 'cause she had a meeting, to answer and help guide any organizations who want to take this particular portion of the information further.
Awesome. So there has been progress made to diversity, equity, and inclusion for 2022. There was a gap of 0.65 between the degree to which DE&I is important to the individual versus the perceived importance to the ecosystem. So in 2021, there was a gap of 1.19, but the gap between personal importance of DE&I and perceived importance to the ecosystem has shrunk by 0.54 within the year. So there's still lots of room for improvement and growth, which we'll cover in the following slides. So as you can see, this is the year-over-year comparison from 2021 to 2022. 2021 is highlighted in gray and 2022 is highlighted in green. All of the scores went up, except for the importance of DE&I to individuals, which went down from 8.71 to 8.69. And DE&I is important to the success of the ecosystem, which stayed the same.
Okay, so these three recommendations, as I mentioned previously, are similar to last year's recommendations around connecting the experienced with the newbies, minding the gap, and nurturing psychological safety. So we'll go into these in a bit of detail, and then we'll wrap up. We thought it was important to identify that these were the core roles in the ecosystem that are the top ranking roles that filled out the survey. So we're all here for the right reasons. Entrepreneurs and founders were about 40% of the respondents, and then all of those building the scaffolding around our founders are at about the same number. And then those in the remaining categories would be things like investors. I don't remember a lot of other categories. Yes, Craig. It's however you identify personally. So I can't tell you if you identify as a founder or an entrepreneur or a freelancer, but you can identify as those through the survey, and you can choose more than one. So as you can probably guess, there are many individuals in the ecosystem who wear many hats and who chose nearly everything on the list. That's how they identify. So yeah, great. We'll go to the next slide. So this whole idea about connecting the experienced with the newbies, this prevailed from last year's data as well, that there's almost a 50-50 match between the younger and the older gens. So we have like the Gen Z and the millennials making up almost 50, and the Gen X and the baby boomers making up almost 50. So what an opportunity for us to all, match up and learn from each other. You can also see, it's kind of tiny, but on the what would be like a lower end of the scale, those that have been in the ecosystem for less time. So usually the younger generations, things like DE&I, which this is rating, were more important to them. And so that's what the chart is about there on the left, that both DE&I to them as individuals and to the ecosystem success were slightly more important, not a whole lot more important, but I think there's definitely opportunities there to collaborate and find areas to learn from each other reciprocally. Is that the second time I tried to say that word and I said it wrong? Okay, we'll move to the next slide. I think that was all on mine. Yeah, your turn.
Okay, awesome. The second recommendation was mind the gap. And so one way to quantify a feeling of inclusion is the gap between how diversity and inclusion is to a particular demographic and how important that same group feels diversity and inclusion is to the population as a whole. So there were 11 groups that indicated a gap greater than 0.95 and how important DE&I is to them personally versus how important they perceive DE&I being to the ecosystem as a whole. And so these 11 groups on the left and also on the right are the ones that found that there was a gap greater, being that the importance of DEI to them was more important, perceived the importance to the entire ecosystem. So ensuring diverse voices are brought into the fold becomes easier when spaces, events, and tools are designed to service diverse needs. And so 13% identifies being neurodiverse, which is 3% from 2021. 14% identifies having a mental illness. 45% identify as a primary caregiver to dependents. 44% identify as women, which is 9% from 2021, and 7% identifies lesbian, gay, bisexual, or queer. And so including accessible design for people with physical or mental disabilities and inclusive design for wide-ranging cultural perspectives, and focusing on existing needs of the ecosystem, such as the 13% of respondents identifying as neurodiverse and 14% as having a mental illness, will move the ecosystem from diverse to inclusive and equitable. And considering the 44% of the ecosystem that identifies as women, we can focus on eliminating microaggressions and attract more women of diverse leaderships and bringing these voices directly to the leadership, strategy, and design tables to ensure valuable insights are captured. This is also important to note that when comparing the Alberta census data to our participants in the ecosystem survey this year, there were representation is lacking from several demographic groups, including boomers, women, Black people, Indigenous, and Southeast Asian and East Asian. And this is something that we'll also touch on a little bit later as well.
I don't remember what that was last year, but I feel like there's been a slight increase as far as meeting the census comparable.
Okay, so the third recommendation was nurture psychological safety. Respondents have increased significantly when asked about dimensions of diversity that are often invisible or hidden. So selecting prefer not to say jumped from an average of 4 to 8% for caretaker status, 9% for disability status, and 14% for sexual identity. So there's room for improvement when considering psychological safety to have these people feel included and safe to share who they are, and also they don't have to share who they are, but there is room for nurturing psychological safety within the ecosystem. Sorry, I lost my notes. Oh, I think that's all I had on this one.
Yeah, I think that was the point that our expert made, was that having a culture of belonging means that people are willing to or wanting to show up as their authentic whole selves. And so if we have invisible minorities who are choosing prefer not to say, it could be an indication that they don't feel comfortable doing so. It might not, but it could be. Okay. Oops.
And so there were 11 demographic categories that scored under 6 in 2021. But in 2022, only 2 demographic categories scored under 6. So that's a definite increase from 2021, which is awesome. However, these 2 categories, Indigenous and Southeast Asian, were down from 2021. They scored under a 6 on a 10-point scale when asked if they felt supported. So there's definitely ways that we can include and nurture psychological safety with these 2 demographics going forward.
And Rachel Wade, our DE&I friend, she's got a lot of really tactical ways we can advance like some of these, hopefully advance some of these statistics through creating more inclusive spaces for some of these groups, like the one about caregivers. I noticed SheetGeek is hosting an event with childcare. I didn't even realize how much that meant to me until I saw it posted at an event, and I thought I will go now because of that, right? So tiny example of ways we can show up differently for some of these groups who are not feeling like they necessarily belong. Yeah, anyway, just a personal anecdote. Okay, so these again, recommendations are fairly similar to last year's in that there are many ways we can all show up in moving this work forward in relation to diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. One of them is showcasing, so promoting diverse firsthand storytelling through guest speakers, diversity-focused organizations, and interested team members. But there was a lot of positivity around the trajectory of this work currently being undertaken. So that was positive. This one is huge, and this has been coming to light a lot at the Rainforest around openness and really normalizing the discussion about inclusion related topics, learning opportunities through inclusion moments at the beginning of meetings. And sorry, it's motivate on the next slide that I feel is huge, but also aligning with openness. So maybe we'll head right over to the next slide. There is the one around leadership, which is about the leadership's commitment. Sorry, I'm right in your way. But it's around motivating, the other one I was talking about is around motivating people to speak openly and share experiences openly. Because if we don't have these courageous displays of honest feedback and of allyship of groups who are experiencing these situations, then we'll never learn and we'll never move forward. And my point is they're happening, whether you want to think they're happening or not, or you're seeing them in your day-to-day, we are hearing about them happening. And so you'll see us having more honest conversations about some of those situations and trying our best to display allyship as best we know how, and we're always learning. Cultural and systemic support. So this was directly related to some of the underrepresented groups who don't necessarily feel supported. How can we take a learning approach to how we can better support these groups and listen to these groups and show up again as allies? And then of course, this growth mindset. So there is work to do. The data is proving that. So continuing to learn in the various ways and through the resources we all know. And there are many more available. I know Platform knows of many various resources. Rainforest has a little short list as well. There are many organizations who have offered these resources to learn. So we do want to say, this is kind of wrapping things up around the pillars and diversity, equity, inclusion. And as I mentioned, we did not come at this alone. We had a significant team behind us. And I'll let Amber thank them.
Yeah, we want to say a big thank you to our DE&I expert, Rachel Wade, and our awesome psychometrics expert and data analysis team, Janelle Morgan and Rose at CashU. We honestly couldn't have done it without them. They spent a lot of time analyzing the data and putting together the report, the metrics of the report and studying it. So a big thank you to them for helping us with this.
Yeah, and if you're looking to do any similar reporting, they know a lot about our ecosystem now, so they'll come in it with that that level of knowledge. Yeah, we'll just leave this here for you to take in. Cheers to Amber and her team at Queer Innovation Meetup and Dr. Ty McKinney, and various other groups that are doing this work. On a final note, next steps. What are we all going to do about this? There's definitely room for growth in all pillars and all areas. And so we have identified areas in which we'll be conducting work through the culture pillar this coming year, or at least this coming quarter, and we'll see what comes next. But we do urge you to either join us in some of that work or use this report alongside any other data sources you use to, infiltrate your own strategic planning, your own day-to-day work, and see like how we can implement some of these things around mentorship, accessibility, resources. There's so many opportunities for growth. So thank you all. We can take some questions from either the audience here live or on the Zoom. And if there are none, we'll head right into community announcements, and then Zoomers will put you into networking rooms and folks here can network in person. Zoomers. We'll see who we have online here. Gary Gunthorpe says, bring your older children to the events to get them introduced to the community and vice versa. My son will be showing up any moment, actually. Yes. Tearing this place apart. Any other questions in the chat from the audience? Al, do you want to use a microphone so they can hear you online?
Certainly, thank you. I just wanted to say that with the Rainforest podcast, Leaders, Innovators, and Big Ideas, we have had over the years quite a volume of people volunteering to host episodes. And for whatever reason, it's sort of died off. It's become sort of like few and far between. And the goal of the podcast is to have the community interviewing the community. So I'm actually going to beg. I'm going to make this real. Okay. Please, everyone, host an episode. If everybody hosts one episode, we can go quite a ways with the podcast before I have to beg again. And for the DEI side of things, I would love to get a lot more representation from the other groups that don't feel represented. Host a show and interview somebody else who's not represented, and let's get some more collective representation going and talk about these things and share these stories. I think that would be really, really valuable. So that's my thing. Okay, thank you.
Dan Olison saying, oh, sorry, that's an announcement. We'll get to that in just a moment. Thank you, Al. And thank you for all the work you do on the podcast to keep it alive and well. And it's so easy, you guys. It's like all you have to do is sit in front of your Zoom and click a space bar. Honest to God, it's that easy. So maybe next time you have a meeting book, just record it. That'd be weird. I'll stop talking now. Okay, any other questions? Zachary Novak.
A little bit of a personal question for Brigitte and Amber. When you were doing the work, what were you most surprised by?
I'll be honest, this year's results were a lot less surprising than last year's results. I think I was surprised by the perception of movement towards a more inclusive ecosystem in such a short amount of time, because we really brought this to light last year, but we did start the work the year previously. And there was, though we highlight a lot of things where there are room to grow, there was a lot of positivity around where we've come, how far we've come. So that would be one. The other was the theme around failure and the lack of acceptance of failure. Like, it was loud and it was interesting to me.
Yeah, none of it really shocked me. I think we were kind of expecting a lot of it, but I I'd have to say like the diversity and inclusion bit, like just seeing the increase, that was awesome to see. I definitely thought like it would definitely be like maybe a little lower, but the fact that it's higher is awesome. The fact that one of the things that shocked me was that, you know, it was more important to individuals than the ecosystem, seeing that number stay the same, which is, it's great. It means there's room for more improvement, but definitely would have liked to see that go a little further. And yeah, I think the risk too, that was also very interesting to see for me. Yeah.
Do you think that the pandemic, us going remote and then coming back in person, impacted this like the score kind of went up and then came down and went up? It's kind of like opposite of what happened in the stock market. I don't know. But do you think it's had any impact, like, you know, the changes in how we get together?
The impact of the pandemic? Yes. Yeah. Yes. So last year, the score took a bit of a dip, and we did attribute it to the pandemic. Who didn't point to the pandemic when there was something to point a finger at, honestly? But I think it did affect relationship building, which is all about, you know, builds our culture and ability to trust each other, etc. So yes, last year we really pointed to it, and I do believe that the increase in like in-person activity will move, especially the culture pillar, which saw the biggest increase. But I'm no data analyst. I don't know. Do you have thoughts, Amber?
No, I think I would like echo that. I would echo that too.
Okay. Any other questions? And we'll go to community announcements. Dan Olison from Careers saying on April 4th, he wants to help introduce junior and senior high youth to the ecosystem. Can you help is his ask. I'm not sure what he wants help with exactly, but reach out to Dan from Careers, Dan Olison. Thank you, Ray. Al, you're getting a lot of support in the chat for folks wanting to do the podcast, so that's great. Ray shared the link on the online. Anyone else from the online world who wants to share a community announcement? Registration is open for those rainforest circles we spoke about. It is going to be fun. It's going to be exciting, and it's going to be one hell of a personal growth learning experience. So I encourage everyone to join. Susanna's going, what is it? We talked about it at the beginning of the hour, but it is a, call it relationship-based learning experience, where you'll get to build really strong relationships with circles, groups that you'll be working with to grow in the areas of leadership. We'll talk about DE&I. We'll talk about all things related to the ecosystem. And it's free. Thank you, CIC. It's free, and it's a 7-week course, but it is a small time commitment. It's just an hour a week with a big kickoff event and a big wrap-up event. So check that out from the rainforest side. And Brent Zuber has a community note. Cybera and Learning Cities YYC are looking for board members. Interesting. So I don't know who the contact is there. Maybe David Finch or... Oh, they're both individually looking for board members. So that makes sense. I'm maybe reach out to Brent because he might have the contacts for that. Brent Zuber, or maybe it's on their websites. Or Graham Skuchka. Yeah, he's here. Chat with him. Okay. On that note, we will move the online folks into networking groups. And next week, lunch with lunch. Thanks to Neo Financial. We will be going to their offices, checking them out, doing a tour and chatting with their staff, and they will be providing us with lunch. The week after that, we are going to the UFC's Hunter Hub for Entrepreneurial Thinking. So everybody, especially like those online, those here, please come to the university with us and meet students and learn about what they're working on. After UFC, we're also going to Mount Royal. We're going to Bow Valley College. We're going to SAIT to talk about tech stewardship. There's lots of fun stuff happening. So check out our registration page and join us. Oh, Brad. Oh, thank you, Brad. Wish you could be here. Thanks,
Thank
Vanessa. Thanks,
you.
everybody.
Thank you.
Have a great rest of the week.
Thank you also to Platform for hosting us and Michael and Michaela for helping us with the tech.